So we're looking at like how the words are actually formed. When you're hiring for a technology manager, what does that mean? Are you looking for a technical technology manager? Are you looking for someone who grew up in the chops of software development, knows all of the full delivery lifecycle? Or are you looking for someone who's more project focused? If your job description isn't conveying those skills or that type of clarification in the job description, you're not going to get the right person. You might get lucky, but when you're hiring at scale, you can't do that time and time again.
Don't conduct your analysis in isolation because data is so incredibly powerful.
Not defending just the tribe, but defending the organization.
Those creative people that you really want to keep empowered, keep excited, keep motivated, keep thinking.
A good experience pays dividends down the line.
Stereotypes tend to break down in proximity.
Welcome to We're Only Human, a podcast about human resources, business, technology, and the workplace. My name is Ben Eubanks, your host, and I'm so glad you're here. Hey everyone, welcome to We're Only Human. I'm so glad you're here with us. Looking forward to a fun conversation, really diving into skills, talent, data, all those kind of fun things, just like the trifecta of nerdiness here. And so glad that I have a fellow nerd friend, someone who I appreciate very much, Brian Jackson here from Southwest Airlines, to talk about some of these things, how he sees the market, the kind of work he's doing, all that good stuff. Brian, welcome.
Hey, Ben, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I had the distinct pleasure to meet you in person. I don't know if it was a year ago or not now. It's been a while, but I got a chance to meet you at the HQ there. And if anybody's out there listening that's in HR, that's in talent, they do these regular sessions where they bring in leaders from outside the organization to talk about what culture's like at Southwest, everything else. And so I happened to be there on a day that was happening. And so it was fun to just see all the stuff going on, all the energy, and y'all are doing some incredible work. So I'm glad to call the Southwest team a friend, and glad to have you here to talk about some of the stuff that you're seeing in the market, some of the ways you're making decisions and looking at data, all that good stuff. So before we get into all the fun, would you take a minute and tell the audience more about who you are and what you do, please?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Brian Jackson. My background is in sourcing or talent acquisition. That's ultimately led me into this new world of talent intelligence with a kind of focus on the labor market side of it. In addition to finding the top talent for our clients, the past 5 years at Southwest has really been in the sourcing and TA functions. So specifically supporting Southwest. The 5 years previous to that one was more of an agency, traditional headhunter, going out and trying to find for multiple clients. So bringing those large landscape views to Southwest, and then from Southwest, narrowing that into more of a market view is where my role has led me into this to discuss more of the broader labor issues, helping provide those larger insights, trends, what's happening with certain talent pools. That's where the fun is right now because it's unknown. We're going through and figuring out how we can digest all that information, but also give good actionable insights back to the business.
That was one of the fun conversations you and I had before, is how you ending up in this sort of unique role of, hey, what's happening in the world? And you're like, I like data. Let me take a look and see. And then you became that sort of evolved into the work you're doing. Do you think that came from your breadth of experience as an outside recruiter who is working for different companies because you had a little bit of a handle on that? Is it because you naturally have a bent towards the data? Is it a combination of all the things?
All the above, yes. So it's one thing when you're working for multiple clients, you're not going to go out, you're not going to find 1,700 different candidates to fill their roles with. You're going to find 5 candidates. You're going to talk to these people, you're going to build those relationships, and they get to know those companies and what they need. But in order to do all that, you got to talk to probably 30 to 100 people. So your breadth, to your point, it's just going to be increased on the agency side of life. And then once you're able to come over into the corporate, or if you decide to make that leap over, now you're going to be focused more on like the strategy of what that market's telling you. So I think it's like kind of that being able to look back at the talent pool, not necessarily get too hung up on the ones and twos, but look at it from the whole number there. And that's, to your point, that's where it all evolved. Now we're telling a story. Now I'm helping you understand something that I have been doing for a year or the last 6 months. I can tell you how hard it is, but it's much easier to say I've talked to 1,000 people. Of those 1,000, 200 replied back to me, roughly a 20% response rate. So now just by talking through what I've done, I'm starting to quantify all of those different steps. And that's getting into telling the story with data, just out of necessity almost. Yeah.
Yes. You can't get into the nuances of every single one of those. You got to start looking at that with a broad perspective. So that's kind of leads me into what I wanted to talk to you about is you've been spending a lot of your time looking at skill availability in certain markets, thinking about bigger labor market issues, everything else. I know one of the conversations we had, you're like, you're living in the Fred data, basically, right? All the stuff that the government's reporting back on job openings and everything else, talent availability, you were eat, sleep, and breathing that for, again, more than a year now. Why should the people listening into this, these enterprise TA teams, why should those things be on their radar?
Man, I think it really starts at staying ahead in most cases. We're keeping up with this evolution of market demands. And honestly, this is the big picture. We don't know what's going to be happening next month. We have an idea of what happened last month. So let's use kind of a good firm data set as our foundation to understand basic trends. This is where I think the labor market, the macro labor market being more of, we're looking a month back, so it's not going to be current point in time. So it's going to be using those trends to get into the organizational's talent pool. This is where every organization is different. They all have different hiring needs. They have different hiring practices, methodologies, cultures. So very difficult to do a broad stroke across all companies. So when we bring it into the business unit, I think that's going to be the case that really focus on. Even within a company, you may be doing the same skill, but you have a different approach to it. You use a different part of the business. Maybe there's a different sense of urgency with that as well. So now, like, all of those little nuances are very difficult from a data perspective to bifurcate from, right? Like, you have to really make sure that you're taking all of that together and looking at it as a whole. And that's kind of that talent intelligence world. So we're using data, we're using insights, and that's where those worlds are coming together. The companies, man, if you're doing any sort of hiring at scale, and I want to say at scale in this sense too, because that's where we're looking at labor market. We can't say we're going to hire one person. Oh, but look at all these thousands of people out there that are unemployed right now. That's not apples to apples. You're completely different universes here. We have to look at, when we're hiring at scale, what can we compare that to? So comparing like data sets is what we're essentially doing here. If you don't have, you're hiring thousands of people, you're hiring tens of thousands of people. If you're stuck into a couple of hundreds, that's going to be best to go out and do some smiling, dialing, knocking on doors, talking to people to understand what that particular market's. So it's on your use case. The big picture may or may not work out for you.
Okay. I'm thinking when you said you're hiring one person, there's the lower you scale down in terms of your hiring volume, the more we're using a tank to kill a housefly. We don't need this kind of horsepower or this kind of depth of looking at things. But when you are saying, hey, we've got to hire 30,000 of these people to do this type of job next year, suddenly start to really feel the pressure of, do they exist right now? If so, where are they? Are their skills what we need? Or are those skills shifting from what they were last year in this role? And next year's going to be something different. It's going to evolve. Right? How are we going to make sure our current people are ready for that? How are we going to make sure the next people are ready for that? So there's all these questions start presenting themselves when you start to scale that up and think about just how difficult it is to make all those pieces line up. So that's why I appreciate that perspective on this. One of the things I keep going back to, like how Brian ended up in this role, which I didn't mean for this whole conversation to be that way, but I think someone else listening into this may hear this and think, oh, I like this idea too. I was interested in this too. So trying to make sure I meet those people where they are. We talked about some of these pieces of this, and you got really comfortable with, okay, I can take all that data and I can start looking at those things. I can start making recommendations. I can make slide decks all day long, but I've got to actually start sharing some advice, sharing some recommendations based on those things. And as you said earlier, it's because you were naturally leaned that way towards the data side. I think your experience as a sourcer also got you really comfortable with looking at the skills of a role, not just a job posting and hoping that person showed up, but you got used to going out and finding the people based on whatever those skills were. And now you're just doing a really big souped up version of that at volume. So everyone listening to that. So I want to kind of transition this way. That's one of the things that we touched on. But the other piece of this is where you actually sit. And you don't have to be Southwest specific necessarily, but you talked about talent intelligence. And I've had one of our mutual friends, Travis Wendling, on in the past to talk about this. But it's like this weird space between people analytics over here and TAs over there. And hey, where are we going to put these people? They talk about talent. We'll put them in the middle of all these things, but you're not really in one or the other fully, it feels like.
I'm going to put a third curveball into that.
Okay, bring it.
Because I actually sit on the recruitment marketing team in talent acquisition in the people department. So to throw in all the buzzwords there, we're a little different in how we approach this. I think sitting on the recruitment marketing team gives a little different perspective because it's not just data that we're looking at. It's also who's going to be viewing that job description. So we're looking at like how the words are actually formed. Like when you're hiring for a technology manager, what does that mean? Are you looking for a technical technology manager? Are you looking for someone who grew up in the chops of software development, knows all of the full delivery lifecycle? Or are you looking for someone who's more project focused, that really just is a project manager that's going to be managing several different technology teams across the board? Or are you looking for a very specific kind of technology manager that only focuses on one type of skill? Let's say it's been a while since I've been in the technology recruiting world, but back a couple of years ago, it was DevOps was a hot one, right? Like, what part of DevOps, or how do you define DevOps? That in and of itself is its own nuance. Now we're looking at nuance upon nuance. And if your job description isn't conveying those skills or that type of clarification in the job description, you're not going to get the right person. I say that you might get lucky.
Yes.
A blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. And when you post and pray, and that's your methodology of finding people, it's going to happen. But when you're hiring again at scale, you can't do that time and time again, because now that's how much is that cost of hire just exponentially increasing by posting it more than twice.
Yes.
Go through, get it done, take a little bit longer, understand the skills. What does that mean? Like, what are we looking for here? I need someone that's got a background in development, but we're going to be supporting an infrastructure team. Okay, so now we've got two areas of focus instead of all of technology management. Or now we're starting to get into more of the skill focus. And I think that's where another one back again, the sourcing world of understanding like what the puzzle pieces fit together. I had the technology sourcer background, not a technologist. So like I understood how they went together or what connected, not necessarily how they did it.
Yeah.
So that's where I would go, okay, if you're looking for A, B, and C skill, that actually equals, and that's the start of the talent intelligence, what the profiles that we use, and really how we look at some of these more difficult to hire positions. And then you can't just go and just talk to someone and say, oh yeah, you sound like you got a good personality. Come on.
Job title match. Okay, we're good to go.
Yeah,
well, that job title could mean 20 different things depending on the kind of company, the type of role, all that stuff. I think it's a really great clarification there for anyone listening to that. It's a good practical takeaway of don't assume that job title means the same thing across all those, because that example you gave was a great one where it can mean a lot of different things. I remember when we were for an engineering company, when I was doing the recruiting for them, and we had specifically broken out as a career track, technical program managers. We need a technical person that has a little of the program management piece, but the other track there that they were counterparts to was a very specific program manager. They were only doing that part. They had no technical background at all. And so we had to understand where to plug the right one in, because if we said, oh, we need a TPM here, like, no, they're just going to be doing budgets all day and forecasts and schedules. That person would punch himself in the face probably, because it was not what their strengths were. We said, hey, we've got 7 engineers on this project. You got to make sure that all those resources are aligned all the way through the end, through all the milestones, everything else. That's where they're going to really shine. And so we had to find out that sort of thing. And we created a separate, specific set of tracks to be able to align those things, because we stumbled over that more than once, I'll say, and learned the hard way that you can't just assume they're the same thing.
Yeah, well, and from your talent acquisitions team's perspective, they're thanking you because now they're not having to go and rework the position they just worked 3 months on 3 months ago, and they know how hard it was. So now you may not have the highest priority, the most intent going into it. You're like, I just filled this, Rex. Why am I doing this again? So like that kind of, you're chasing your tail at that point. So work smarter, not harder. Getting into that, why would we even need talent intelligence? That's what it boils down to. It's just working smarter, more efficiently, effectively.
Yes. Getting pointed in the right direction. So let's talk about some of those things. So as someone who's in this talent intelligence space that's still relatively new across the spectrum of all the different types of roles in TA and elsewhere, what kind of insights are you looking for when you're trying to make decisions? You've already said this isn't about a decision to hire one person. It's a decision to hire lots of people, or move in a big direction, or we're opening this new operation. We've got to be able to staff that up. There's lots of different strategic things that might force that. What sort of insights data sources, things like that are you considering when you're making those calls?
We talked about it. We've been talking about it. It's the evolution of the skills. We mentioned that earlier. It depends on what company you're in, but now it's really going to depend on what geographic market you're in. If you would ask me 5 years ago, what does your hardest to hire group need? I might have said we needed a higher salary band, or maybe we needed more remote work focused. This is all pre-pandemic, of course.
Yeah.
But when you're speaking to the end of insourcing the tech talent, growing digital transformation, we're really starting to blow up more of the evolution of these skills. So different labor markets, different geographic areas are going to have different needs. When we hire in Dallas, commuting is a different conversation than when we hire in Chicago. Dallas, I'll speak very generally here about Texas, and everyone drives along. Like, Texas is big, right?
Yes.
For me, I live in Fort Worth. I drive 50 miles to get to headquarters. It takes me about an hour. Ironically, when I used to live in Dallas, I lived 10 miles away, and it would take me about 45 minutes. Distance is more important about time of commute. So you need to know the market. You need to know, if you live in Fort Worth, a commutable drive to Love Field, not too bad. Depends on every person now, of course. But when you go to the Chicago area, your mileage just can change completely. So if we're looking at us going to either, let's say, O'Hare, which is even the north end of Chicagoland, you're not going to go and try to talk to somebody on the south side, because now in order to get there, they have to take, and I don't know the L system that well, but I'm going to say about two to three different trains just to get up to the north side. How long is that commute going to be? Is that a doable commute? So just knowing your market. So as we zoom in and out of those different markets, each of those are going to have different needs. We use a talent neuron for a lot of our external talent data. So by able to use them, we're able to go in and see job descriptions of all posted talent profile of talent groups. So it goes back to the old sourcing days of looking through hundreds and hundreds of profiles to understand, am I about to talk to the right one, or am I on the right path? I do that now with job descriptions. So we'll go through and I'll come through job descriptions, and depends on what level of fidelity we're looking at. If we're just trying to get a general view, I'm not going to read every single one. I'm going to do some skimming, scanning, read a couple, ingest whatever they're trying to advertise to our similar talent pool. Hiring a entry level, let's say, warehouse worker with a sign-on bonus 3 years ago, you would have been laughed out the door. Now, last year, if you weren't having a sign-on bonus and like, you weren't going anywhere, like you weren't getting the hires you needed. So the market changes. We've all experienced this in the last couple of years, especially in the post-pandemic or 2021 and on. The needs are going to depend on what the larger market dictates. We were very heavy in the consuming of durable goods at that time. So we're getting all of this stuff off Amazon. We're a big just consumption mode. We have pent-up demand from the pandemic, and everyone's changing jobs and they're getting more money. They're moving to home. Like, all of these things are happening. So it's like the snowball effect. Now we're pulling back and we're going more towards services. So again, looking at the larger labor market, we're able to say, okay, I'm seeing trends in consumer goods spend increasing, and transportation and hotel services are laying flat or they're declining. Okay, maybe we're about to get a big e-commerce boom. That's looking back at 21 and 22 and seeing some of that stuff, but really determining what those skills are now that we see in the market is going to help us in the future too. So just because we're trying to react right now, I think that's a lot of how talent intelligence, this is the maturity of talent intelligence as a practice, but especially at Southwest, we're setting our baseline now. We're understanding what it means when we have a major economic upturn, what that happens to our labor group. Like, before we just got to hire more people, or we got to post more jobs. Let us know in 6 months how that's going, how many people you've hired, and then we'll make another adjustment. So like, we're no longer, thankfully, in those states. We're able to make a little bit more real-time decisions based on data. We're able to see these trends happening. And that, honestly, that's the fun part for me. Like, why I get excited about just talking about data. And if you would have asked me 15 years ago, would you be excited about like this? I would have laughed at you and said, no, I'm not that nerdy. And look at me now. And
look at you now. Got a popcorn and a front row seat to this is changing. There's some fun to that though. That's why I love the research, because I tell people I just like to know what's underneath the rocks when I turn them over. I don't know all the answers, but occasionally I'll find something, even if it tells me I was completely wrong. I'm just glad to know. And I feel like
precisely that curiosity that leads you to the answer. Going back a little bit to what all might need in this role or how this role, what I find most interesting is I don't know the answer to most things I'm doing. I get to go and research. I get to find that out. I get to say, hey, we're looking at this labor market data. We're now pulling in this talent pool for this particular market. What does that mean? Okay, we see 30,000 is our supply of candidates and our competition is just under 1,000. There's a lot of people out there and not a lot of people getting a job. Should we enter that market, or should we start looking at either transferable or adjacent skills to maybe pull some of that market over this way to us, or that supplied over to us?
I'm going to challenge you a little bit. You said, I don't know the answers. And I'm going to say that there probably isn't one clear, real answer to this, right? There's probably multiple answers on this spectrum. And so you're saying, okay, let me look at all the stuff I can and then make my best accurate judgment based on that. We may find out 6 months later that I should have adjusted this way, adjusted that way, but it's not that there is one answer and you're just like, I got to go dig all this stuff up, because if someone else is trying to follow in your footsteps, I don't want them to think, Brian seems like he just landed on the right thing. No, you're not that lucky. And unfortunately, neither of us is that smart. We just got to keep digging, keep looking. Use the blind squirrel finds a nut. Every once in a while, use that saying earlier. That was what my wrestling coach used to tell me. I don't know why he did, but I used to get that occasionally when I'd win a match. Speaking of that piece on if someone else is following your footsteps, I want to ask a question around that, if you don't mind. I'd love for you to talk to someone who is where you were 2 or 3 years ago, who maybe is at the beginning of this or is seeing some of these things like, hey, I think some of the stuff Ryan's talking about today is relevant to our organization, or we don't have someone that's dedicated to this, but I'm intrigued by the idea of looking at some of these bigger trends and being the expert in my organization for those things. What advice would you give them? How should they start building that out in themselves, the skill or a set of skills? How should they start feeling out their leadership's interest or openness to that? We can walk through this for a little bit. I don't really understand that piece, because there's no college degree that says, hey, I want to go into talent intelligence. It's not out there. It's just someone starts out probably like you, feels out some of these things and realizes, hey, maybe I could do this. So let's start off. How should someone be starting if they're in your sort of shoes a couple of years ago, before you really got into this deeply? What sort of things should they start doing, thinking about, prioritizing?
That's a great question, because I think everyone I've talked to in the talent intelligence space has a different path to today. Using my experience and my background, sourcing, talent acquisition, talking to people, understanding what their needs are, less of what job they did. I think that's going to be one, anticipating of needs or wants. How do you do that? What does that mean? First, you got to speak up. At the end of the day, if you have an idea, or if you know something, or if you saw something online that was a great article and you then follow that second, third level down and got the actual source information, share that. That's the part that the more I'm learning about the data world, and it needs to really be just democratized. Data is powerful. It's very important. But if you are the only one that knows it, what does that do to anybody? You got to share this information. So being able to speak up, and I know that's not everyone's cup of tea. Personally, I have no problem saying, I have an opinion on this. This is what I found. What do you think? So I think that's one for me that I definitely had going for me, is if someone asks me a question, I'm going to give you my answer, truthful, best of my ability, whether you like that or not. So that's that little, you got to be a little softer around the edges sometimes. It can't be as direct in a professional setting, but being able to speak up to what you found to be interesting into your world, there's got to be somebody else out there that finds it interesting, especially if we're focusing on talent acquisition and hiring people. The TA world now has a bigger seat at the table after coming out of the pandemic. Everyone saw how important people were, how hard hiring is. It's not just flipping a switch and I can hire 1,000 people. A lot of work goes into that. So speaking up, curiosity, follow that rabbit trail. I think that's a little bit of where, again, the sourcing world really bleeds in perfectly to this, is because I don't know the labor market at that time. When I get the job description, I have no idea. I have to go and do my research. I got to find where that path is. Now I start seeing I see a good talent pool over here. I see a good one over here. I can start dropping some lines in, sending some messages out and seeing what responses I get. Same thing on my side now. Now it's a little bit more strategic. It's a little more focused into the business needs. So we have that we can always build around and understand. But without that curiosity, without being able to say, hey, I just found this really cool chart that's able to illustrate what just happened over the last 3 years. Could you use that? Could talking to your leaders, could you use this in any of your conversations? If they say no, that might be a sign of other things to come. Because in this world today, data is the new oil. I think one of the CEOs of Microsoft said that. That's the big commodity now. It's data, and we can all see that. So who doesn't need data to make a decision?
So that's a natural sort of fit that I've alluded to this earlier and you just touched on a little bit, but so you're talking about taking the initiative, being willing to ask questions, being willing to share some things, being curious. I think all those are great pieces. You alluded to find someone else who's interested in this. Hopefully you're listening to your leaders around you, the lines of business leaders and other operational leaders saying, man, I've got this challenge, this problem. Okay, great. Let me go dig something up, see if it would help you, which is exactly what you're talking about here.
Yep, exactly.
What about your own leadership? Kind of feeling them out or seeing if they're open to this kind of thing? Because obviously it requires some time, some effort, right? Brian likes to eat and feed his family, so he doesn't work for free. They have to be willing to invest in this to some degree to really make it go. How would you feel out a leader if you were at some other organization right now? We just picked you up and plunked you down and said, okay, I want you to start building this, but the leaders may not know yet that they need this. How would you start feeling them out for that?
That's a good question, Ben.
You've already said you're just going to talk whether they listen or not.
A lot of it's that, and I want to look back at how I fell into this by, like you just mentioned, listening to my leader. He said, I want to be the labor market expert. That's literally what I've been trying to do my whole career. Yes. Let me figure that out for you real quick. Tess, we need resources. That's going to be one thing. I think looking at it, if you picked me up now and put me in a new company and said, Brian, go build talent intelligence, my first question right off the bat was what resources do I have available to me? Is it internal? Is it external? Is it another team that's already doing data analytics? Or is it another team involved in people analytics? And maybe I can just inject an external data feed essentially, or an external data pipeline into their normal curation of data. If none of that exists, that's a different conversation altogether. Not one that is it's not undoable. It's just a bigger lift. Now we need more people to look at from an analytical perspective. What does this data mean to us? Speaking in the talent intelligence space, that external piece, that means a really big difference between people analytics and talent intelligence is being able to inject that external lens to it, or that external data coming in. Once we bring that together, that to me is where the intelligence comes in. You have people analytics, you have talent intelligence or talent analytics. Bring those together. Now that's kind of the talent intelligence space. I think the other part of that is understanding, and I'm currently living in this Groundhog's Day, if you will. What HRS system are you on? When you look back, do you change HRS systems in your recent past? We just recently went through a change, and that's been, we're trying to compare, and the pandemic really just threw a hard line in the sand, pre and post pandemic. Hiring markets. We were in a different system pre-pandemic. That's bringing up all of its own hurdles along the way of understanding how do we compare apples and grapes that are not even on the same cart. They're talking different languages, literally.
Apples and machetes.
Yeah. So we being able, if that's the case, that's where we're at now. If I came into this one, we're learning, we're growing, but I would, right off the bat, I would need Alteryx. I would need some sort of data tool to be able to understand and translate and be able to manipulate the data in a way that I can then align like data sets. Like I said, Groundhog's Day there, we're in it now and we're trying to figure that out. It sounds real simple. We'll just do A plus A and there you go. Or just however many hires you had that one year to however many hires you had this year. And it's not as cut and dry as that with some systems, depending on how the legacy was set up and how your new one's set up. Not to get all about that, but resources, technology, those are going to be the first two things I want to understand. From there, it's what's your hiring scale? Like, what are we looking at here? Are you a company of 300 and you're looking to grow to 3,000? That might be something that you need talent intelligence at a smaller level because you're about to scale up 10x that. So that's a whole different level of, you need to be working smarter, not harder. You need to make that one offer, try to get that offer to hire ratio as low as possible, so you're not doing just 3 times as much work to hire one person. I think starting there, like those 3 things. So technology, resources, being able to understand what the hiring levels or hiring expectations are. From there, now we're getting into more tactical, more cultural. How do you present data? How do you ingest the data? Does your business units do their own workforce planning? Does people department or their HR does their workforce planning? Now we're getting into not an easy answer, and it's gonna be very nuanced there, but that's kind of that double click in or click through that I would do.
Absolutely. I love I happened across that a second ago, just saying if I picked you up and dropped you somewhere else, but I think that's a great way of thinking about that without all the other support you have around you right now. You're like, oh, this would have to be true in order for that to happen. This would have to be true. I would need this in place. And I'm talking to more talent leaders in the last few years that are telling me, hey, I just changed to a new company, and one of the prereqs or one of the requirements for me going over there was, we've got to bring this tool along with me because it helps me to be as effective as I am. And I'm hearing more and more of that from leaders across all areas like comp, learning, TA, leaders saying, this tool that I've been using, I know it really well. I understand how it solves this problem. Best or not, it works for us. And it makes me and my team more capable as a function. I'm seeing more of that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's again the evolution of talent acquisition right now, is we're becoming more technical. It's no longer just get on the phone and call people, or just go hire some folks. Just go to a hiring event and set up shop and pass on and take resumes. Like,
did you bring your table skirt?
You got your pop-up banner? Yeah, we're good. We'll hire folks. So it's not the same world 5-10 years ago as it is today. I think it speaks even more volumes to what you were just saying there, is just technology has such a big impact in talent intelligence specifically. We'll mark that as my number 4. Requirement of tools must have number 4, requirement of tools. We use Talent Neuron. Love using Talent Neuron. It is very powerful because you have that many data scientists, you have that many data points, you're scraping, like it really does bring a higher level of not only integrity with our data, but also it's not just me that's running it, that my customers, I've got a team behind me, third-party company over here that has data scientists doing it. I can call them up right now and we can dive into the information as deep as we want to go. So I think having that level of backup really helps with technology. Yeah, great. Love that.
All right. Okay, so I feel like I could just nerd out with you all day long. I go deeper and asking more nuanced questions, but I'm going to wear you out at some point. So for the audience's benefit, if someone's heard this and says, hey, Brian is doing some cool stuff, I'd love to connect with him, learn more about what he's up to. You okay if I put your link to your LinkedIn in the show notes?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. I would say reference this chat. Let me know what we talked about a little bit. That's one of my old school sourcing pet peeves. I get a lot of requests out there. I like to know those that are actually interested in networking and not just trying to sell or something else like that.
Yes. So ping Brian, let him know you heard the conversation today, that you got something good from that. And he'd love to chat with you, connect with you, talk more about some of these things. He's been a force for really helping me understand more about talent intelligence, putting you in touch with some other people, because it's so new that there's a lot of things to learn, a lot of ground to cover, and we're all sharing and comparing notes with each other. So thank you again, Brian, for joining me. Such a fun conversation. Look forward to the next time I get a chance to see you in person, say hello. And to everybody else out there, hope you enjoyed the conversation today. Got some good notes, good ideas from this, some good strategy for your TA function or your talent intelligence function if you've actually made it that far. We'll catch you again next time on We're Only Human. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I'm honored to have you as a listener. If you enjoyed this episode, please take 10 seconds to rate it at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, if you know a friend that could benefit from today's conversation, please pass it their way. After all, a rising tide lifts all ships. To see show notes, sponsor information, and our full show archives, visit onlyhumanshow.com.